Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Bartkus, the director of the Ridgefield Historical Society. I'd like to welcome all of you to the Ridgefield History Club here at the Scott House at 4 Sunset Lane in Ridgefield, Connecticut. Today's date is Tuesday, November 19th, 2024, and it's so nice to see all of you. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, the Ridgefield Historical Society is an independent, nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and sharing Ridgefield's historical, cultural, and architectural heritage from the indigenous people who lived here thousands of years ago all the way up to the present day. Archaeology is of special interest to us, and we really encourage the identification and preservation of the historic sites and artifacts buried beneath our feet here in Ridgefield by professional archaeologists before those sites are destroyed and lost forever during construction projects. I invite everyone to get involved in the exciting and important work that we do here by becoming members and volunteers of the Historical Society. So for today's topic, Native American life in Ridgefield, we have a very special guest. Lynn Marie Wieland is a professional archaeologist who has excavated numerous sites during her career, including those here in Ridgefield. We also have Jack Sanders in attendance, who's written over 10 books on Ridgefield's history. And so for today, we're going to be talking about these first peoples who lived here in Ridgefield, going back really for 10,000 years. Not many people realize that there have been inhabitants living on these lands for that long of a period of time. We're going to be going through several time periods, starting with the Paleo time period, then the Archaic, the Woodland, and finally the Contact period. And there are wonderful artifacts in our collection here that were excavated by Lynn Marie and her team at Richardson Park here in Ridgefield, and you see these on the TV screen here today, as well as in the display cases that Lynn Marie is going to be showing you and that we'll be passing around during today's program. So these artifacts have been cataloged and are archived here at the Ridgefield Historical Society in our climate-controlled vault, which is located beneath the Scott House here. We have over 10,000 Ridgefield items in our collection, and our collection is growing every week. And of course, Betsy Reed, our collections manager, is in charge of that collection. And it's all accessible on our website too, ridgefieldhistoricalsociety.org. And this is a great learning tool for students and others in the community and beyond. We usually go around the room for brief introductions before we get started. So for the recording, so I already introduced myself. If you could just briefly state your name, and we could get everyone's name on the record. If you'd like to go next.
Laura Gordon.
Bonnie Humphrey.
Keith Russell.
Terry Bearden-Retker.
Pat Lagos.
Sandy Mazziello.
Elaine Ferry, Andrew Kellerman.
Barbara Sir Philippi.
Amy Egan.
Lynn Mullen.
Harrison Seam.
Lynn Marie Wieland.
Bob Swanson.
Sally Sanders.
Jack Sanders.
Ed Smith.
Pete Nichols. Bruce Willett.
Caroline Molyneux.
Jane Van Wanderen.
Gus Olson. I lived here almost 40 years, and I still haven't found an arrowhead, but I'm still looking.
Suzanne Benton.
Doreen Murdoch.
Thank you, everyone. So I think we're going to start at the very beginning, 10,000 years ago, when the glaciers were starting to recede in this area of the country. There was a lot of water everywhere. There were big game animals like mastodon and caribou that these first peoples were hunting for their subsistence. And the environment was very different. It was tundra-like. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lynn Marie.
Taking my speech right away. What I want you all to do, first off, this jazz that you've all been taught as historians, that our forefathers walked on virgin land when they came over from Europe, is a bunch of. Now, the people that I'm going to tell you about today are the ones who walked on virgin land. I want you to just simply blank your minds and start picturing a land that has no trees, has no grass, green vegetation of that kind, and is totally covered in ice. Not ice, ice. 18,000 years ago, the land that this building is on would have been covered by several feet of ice. By the way, global warming has been going on a very long time. By 12 to 10,000 years ago, from here it is melted. And what we see is we see no dirt. There's no dirt. There's no soil. What you see is some sand, clay, gravel, glacial till all over the place, huge to tiny to boulders like, I'm drawing a total blank, the one over in North Salem, and all the stuff you see here. By the way, as you walk through Richardson Park or pick anywhere else in Ridgefield that you've walked, that you've seen stone structures, those structures are all going to be much bigger than they are now because you're walking about 40 centimeters lower than you are today. The soil takes up that much. It's really sort of cool. The people are wanderers. They had no territories. They're almost literally wandering from meal to meal because the land cannot support any kind of population for any period of time. They have to keep wandering. They are wandering in small family groups. They're all related to one another. And they would be 15 to 25. We don't know that number for certain, but that's a good estimate. They have, as has been mentioned, and we had them around here, mastodons. There was one found over at Lake Kitchewan. The carbon date on the adolescent at mastodon was 10,350. Anyway, somewhat in excess of 10,000 years ago. It's a very different land, and the people wander into it. And at Richardson, we had people. We don't know how many, unfortunately, because few people leave few artifacts. We have 5 paleo artifacts from Richardson Park. We have this little pink thing, which you're going to get to see this up close. This particular point is diagnostic to about 10,000, 9,500 years ago. Now, when I talk about a diagnostic point, artifact, I'm talking about an artifact that you find at a specific, made at a specific time. They're only made during that period of time. And there's something really interesting about the artifacts from the Paleo period, is that the same styles, you seem to find them going across country, from coast to coast and from border to border. This one, for example, this style is found in a thigh bone of a bison in a bison hunt out in Colorado. It is also found under the rib cage of a mastodon, adolescent mastodon, in a swamp in the northern part of the Valley of Mexico. It's a Scott's Bluff point, named Scott's Bluff because that's where it is found, and it is designated as a diagnostic to that period, and it's found in Ridgefield. This is all over the place. And that becomes very important in a few minutes. What we're saying is the people who use them are literally roaming all over the place. We also have a little drill, and there's a flute up it. I'll explain flute in a minute. So we know it's diagnostic to the Paleo period. The little square knife also has a flute. This is very interesting. The little piece of Onondaga shirt you see here is what we call a channel flake. Alrighty? I'll pass this in a minute too. This is a paleo point. Beautiful flaking that runs across. Gorgeous, gorgeous flaking. On the edge is what we call pressure flaking. And you're going to see on this edge of your little pink point, marvelous little pressure flaking. Takes a lot of talent to do it. These are all diagnostic to the paleo period. What's so exciting about my little black chip, and I have another one, it's called a channel flake, is this comes from this flute. This style of paleo happens to come earlier in the paleo period than our little pink point does. What I'm telling you is we may have paleo people at Richardson before 9,500 to 10,000 years ago, which is very exciting. Unfortunately, my provenience for these artifacts is lousy, is the best word I can think of. Paul Roach found this in his garden when he was the head of Parks and Rec. There are, in the place where the garden is, we put in test pits, no other artifacts from any period. This was found in a late archaic level in a site where a mouse had decided to build her house. Now, that's what she probably was underground all over the place, got picked up and brought it. We had no provenience. The square knife is found in a place that was underwater. No provenience. Can you just hold? So there we are. But we know that they are diagnostic to our time. We know we have people at Richardson Park. And we're very special to have people at Richardson Park. Don't bother to open, just wait a second, okay? Don't bother to open the box, it doesn't open. And this is the picture of the paleo point.
I just want to say I'm writing an article about the history.
Could you speak louder? My ears
Yeah,
are...
okay. I want to say that I'm writing an article about the history of masking. And 17 to 21,000 years ago, people were painting in caves. There's a painting in Lisco.
Okay, but we're not doing
Well, I just
that
want
period.
I just want to indicate that in addition to making these tools, there were other elements of creativity.
Oh yes, there's a lot of stuff. Could I, by the way, ask you, I've given a short period and a lot of artifacts to pass around. Could we hold questions till the end? Because if you sidetrack me, I'm going to wander off and we'll never get this done. All right? I'm sorry.
No problem.
All right, because what you bring up, in case you haven't noticed, I'm several thousand years away from. I'm still dealing, these people are wanderers, no territory. They haven't really settled in anywhere. They don't paint until they've settled into a territory. Alrighty. The next period is going to be early archaic. Things have changed outside. You've got some soil. You also have some trees, spruce, hemlock, some pine. You've got vegetation on the ground. Not excessive vegetation, but certainly more vegetation than we had back in the Paleo period. Oh, do you know what I forgot to tell you in the Paleo period? The temperatures are 0 to 60 degrees average. Now when we get to the early archaic, they've warmed up. This is why we have the vegetation. You have more vegetation, you've got more animals, and there's more food. When there's more food, the population increases. Now we begin to find signs that our population is beginning to have a territory. They're beginning to have sites established at different places within that territory. They have what is called an optimal foraging. Or it's a seasonal foraging. There are certain weather events for every season. For example, in fall, of course we don't have nut-bearing trees yet, but we'll get there. the nuts come on the trees. Spring, you find the eggs in the turtle and the bird's nests. Of course, it snows in the winter, it's warmer in the summer. So you forage according to your season, and they would be moving their camps from one place to the other as the seasons progressed. It is within a territory. We'll get to that a little bit more because we're not totally territorial yet, but we have more people. Roger Muller, who discovered the first paleo site in Connecticut, once joked that there were more paleo sites in Connecticut than early archaic. There was only one paleo site, so that tells you there were no early archaic sites. Why? They're awfully hard to find. One of the reasons that they're so hard to find is the people who are looking for them are not looking for the right thing. What they're looking for are early archaic points that look like these. Now those are found in the southeast. So up here in the northeast, that's what they're looking for. The only problem with that is that the points up here look like this, bifurcated points. The little feet on them, and little arms. What's important about this? Remember, paleo artifacts are found from coast to coast and border to border. We're finding out early archaic are not. They're found in a specific place, different styles. Why? Because when a people begin to settle in a spot, they begin to become separate from the people who settle in other places. To designate their separateness, they develop a style. Let's bring it into modern times. The Olympics. Do you remember the outfits that the people from the different countries wore when they were cheering their teams on? This is a style designating their nationality, their place in the world. Style developed back in the time we're talking about does the same thing. It makes our people at Richardson different from the people who live over in New York State. No borders, guys, but that's where we're going. All right, it makes them different. This tells us they're establishing their own land. One of the really cool things we find at Richardson are paleo, and these, that's the wrong one. We have little bits and pieces. There is, and it looks like little gray feet. Okay, we're going to talk about that one in a second. They're broken. They're lousy. But we have a provenience for them. When I talk about a provenience, I mean we dig in levels. In my case, 10 centimeter levels. It's just about what the soil does for me. At Richardson, couldn't have done better. Each level ran approximately 10 centimeters, give or take. Was a different color and a different texture. It was like they designed it just for me to do it easy. And in one area at Richardson Park, we have a strata of late archaic, middle archaic, and early archaic. The reason why I know that is each strata is identified by diagnostic artifacts. How are we doing, guys? We have a strata, an identification of where that belongs. Do you want to know what's even more exciting, which I can't really brag about, but I'm still gonna, is beneath that strata, where I have early archaic, I have more artifacts. What comes before early archaic? Paleos. Unfortunately, there are no diagnostic artifacts in that level. But I have further support. We have people running around there 10 to 12 years, 1,000 years ago, and I have the support that we have the early archaic. Not only that, at Richardson, at not too far away from where we found the first diagnostic point, we found this little point up here and this little, knife. I had to stop and think about what it was. Here, we find them, those two things, and one of the diagnostic points, one of the bifurcated points, on the same level, with a little post mold here and one over here. And it's sort of exciting because that is a workspace. These are fishing tools. Poles put that much aside are probably racks that they made to dry the fish on. We know they're fishing at Richardson 8,000 to 6,000 years ago. And here I'm going to pass out. These are all of the fishing tools. These are all associated. There are points, there are knives, and there are scrapers. That's a scraper, I called it a knife. These are all diagnostic. Well, no, they're not diagnostic. These are all fishing tools. They are found from that site in the early archaic all the way through contact. So they're fishing at Richardson Park, which, considering the fact that Richardson Park is located on a lake, is a bit of a duh, isn't it, guys? But why Richardson Park? Why are they settling there and, that far back, and they're returning to the site? We think probably, if we have the work floor, they're returning to that site. One of the reasons may be Roger Muller found, when he found his paleo site on the Shephog River, he had enough carbon after he dated it to have speciated. And he found that, we're talking now back in the paleo, that he had red oak trees, cedar, and possibly juniper trees. Excuse me, you do not find red oak, juniper, and cedar trees on paleo land. It's too early, it's too cold. Now, what he found there has been borne out at other paleo sites. The theory is the water. Because of the water, it's warmer along the site, or where the site was. And I can definitely tell you at Richardson, that first year we dug until the middle of December, until I finally said, I've got to do Christmas, guys, we've got to quit. I had a great crew. It was 5 to 10 degrees warmer, 5 minutes away from Richardson Park. Richardson Park is 5 to 10 degrees warmer than it was at my house 5 to 10 minutes away. Now, so what you've got is, with the warmer weather, and of course when the rivers flood in the spring melt, they lay more dirt over. Now you get your dirt building up, now your trees can grow. Maybe what we've got, and it's been borne out in northern New England, in northeast, pretty much that he's right. Look at Richardson. And look how close we are to the Titicaca River when you're at Richardson. And back then, you would have been much closer to the Titicaca River because it would have been much wider. So it's probably warmer, and that's why we've got it. Now, I should have passed this sooner, but I don't know about you, but I get a little thrill. Not anymore, it's old-fashioned now. But this is not from Richardson, but it is 10,500 years old. This is from a paleo site in Virginia. The site director gave it to me. I found it at my feet, and I picked it up and handed it to him, and I said, you might want this. He says, these students are so careless with these artifacts. No provenience, it's no good. And he's going to throw it away. And I go, here. So now you can touch a piece of rock that we know. We know it's 10,500 because That's the only thing that was found at that site, was their paleo site. Okay, but we're moving into modern times now. We move on to the Middle Archaic, and we find things are a lot warmer. We have all our nut-bearing trees, and we have all of our grasses, and the stuff that we need to feed everyone. Our population is much larger. It is also much more settled than it was before. We find a raise in ritual throughout the Northeast, especially in the burial rituals. We know that they're beginning now to bury their dead on their territory. Now, up until then, because they're wandering, their dead gets buried wherever it happens. Now, they're burying on their own territory. But there's something else that's happening in the Middle Archaic that lets us know that they're returning. They're beginning to build storage pits. And what they're storing in the storage pits are rock tools. And what they're storing are lithic tools. It's a little dark to see what I'm talking about on this one, so you're probably going to have to feel, and you're going to find a smooth spot. They're storing hammerstones. Now this, by the way, is small for a hammerstone, very small. And they're storing cores. Where did I put my core? This one, by the way, is a very tiny one. And you'll notice there are flat spots all over it, okay? Rocks don't come that way. As I taught my kids, they're man-messed with. This is how we... Sometimes you don't use archaeological language when you're teaching high school students on the site. Now, what they're doing, you have a core. No, not a core, a hammerstone. You have a core. This is almost spent. There's not a really good spot yet. Okay, I can do that. And then you, at an angle, whap, and you get a flake. These are going to be used for cutting and slicing and drilling. We do not do that, guys. You just look at them and keep them separate. Also, notice weight. I have cores from that site that are this big around. Think about moving that stuff from place to place. On the other hand, you don't want to lose it. I'll tell you, a good, well-balanced core is worth its weight in gold. I'm no core hammerstone. It's worth its weight in gold. You don't want to lose it. But you don't want to move them either. You store stuff in a place where you know it's going to be safe and you're going to come back to it. They're territorial. Things are really getting sort of great now. And we're going to move on to the late Archaic. And in the late Archaic, you are not going to believe. The temperature is then as warm as it is today, possibly warmer. The vegetation is flourishing. Animals are flourishing. Our population expands just beyond belief. One of the ways that you measure how many people are at your site are the number of artifacts. At Richardson's site, 75% of the artifacts that we found were found during the late Archaic. The place is abounding in people. We find a lot of people, a lot of tools. It's nice and warm. Man, how easy can it get? Right? Nothing is ever as easy as it seems. Because it turns out that the population grows so quickly that it outdistances the food sources they know how to use. It isn't that they don't have the food, it's just that they have come through this time using certain things a certain way. They even begin, by the way, to use acorns, which, by the way, can be poisonous. But they learn how to soak them until the poison is gone. And they now have another food source. One of the things, okay, nuts, you eat them right from the tree, right? Leave them in the shell, you can store them, no problem. But we need to do something else to get more food. And seeds, something else that we need to do. So what you begin to see in the late archaic is a lot of new stuff. And you see grinding tools, because they're beginning to grind the nuts and the seeds. And now what you do with the ground up stuff, you can make a paste out of it, you can boil it and fry it, or just roast it. All kinds of different ways to eat it. And your new tools, another thing. You start using those storage pits that you saw being built in the Middle Archaic. What you start using them for now is to store food. That's an aha, isn't it? You don't store food unless you're going to come back to it. We are now definitely, absolutely territorial. There's no way that we can be any other way. And our population has increased really well. Politically, I have to do a little bit here. It is, the leaders are chosen by their ability. You don't have elected leaders. It's still very simple chiefdom. You also find that these family groups we have, and by the way, when the population grows, they become extended families. The kids all get married and bring, the boys bring wives home. The girls go live in someone else's when they get married. All right, they're trading. They have a trade network. And I was able to plot the path when I wrote my thesis, when I was a hunter, of one of the trade networks. They have a trade network. They're becoming what an archaeologist would call they're approaching civilization in their development. We see civilization as different than, when I think archaeologically, I see it differently than when I'm just talking. All right? Another thing that they do during the late archaic is they begin to harvest their food very differently. One of the things they do is they burn out sections of forest. This creates a meadow, very much like we've done in Ridgefield with our lawns. Those of you who live in territory where the deer come in and eat your garden. And this is what they've done. They've created a deer meadow. They do it within a certain distance of their villages. Or communities, I think is the better word here. All right, another thing that happens when you get a meadow is berry bushes are going to grow in the margins between the meadow and the forest. Berries are sort of cool here. You eat them straight from the bush and you dry them. Once you dry them, you can eat them all winter long. You can also mix them with bear fat. I wouldn't do that. I've done it. I've had it done. It tastes dreadful, but that's now. But berry bushes also attract bears and birds. They just bring them right to where you want them. A bear, look at the size, a lot of meat, also a lot of fat, and your indigenous people aren't going to get a lot of fat in their diet, and they need it, unlike us who get too much. The pelts on a bear, great blankets, keep it warm. The bear meat, the whole bit, it's the claws, excellent jewelry. Also, you can turn them into weapons and tools. The birds, feathers for decoration, obviously the meat for food. Bird bones make wonderful needles and awls when you're turning your bear's pelt into a cloak, or your deer. So you've got another resource. And one of the really cool resources that begins to happen is that the women, by the way, women gather, men hunt. That is sort of the division of labor. Now, doesn't mean gathering is less important. 80% of their food comes from gathering. But what they've got is a division. People do certain things for the good of the community, is the way they sort of look at things. This territory that they have established is community owned, not individually owned. It's owned by the entire community. If you go out and you get a deer, it is yours, but you bring it home and you give it to your wife to prepare, it becomes hers. But you always share what you've got. This sharing is one of the reasons these people are going to survive the next thing that's coming, and the reason they survived to get to this point. But back to the gathering. The women what they begin to do is they do not gather every seed, every buttercups. They eat buttercups. They don't take everything away. They leave some to reseed. Now this is a new technique. Not only that, they remove the plants from the area that are going to keep those seeds from growing. We call that weeding. It's sort of new to them. So what happens, they leave the stuff to reseed in an area where it's going to grow. It's called casual cultivation. But does it sound like it could lead to something else? Like planting a seed in a field? This is your very beginning step toward agriculture. It is brand new knowledge, brand new technology. It's one of the things that keeps our people alive. They're doing pretty well. They're living a really high life that is absolutely wonderful. Unfortunately, it isn't going to last. Now, what I've got here, I've got artifacts, early, middle, and late archaic. I want you to notice how pretty the quartz, by the way, one of the students who worked with me on the site did this as her internship. This is why we end up with the lovely red satin, which isn't dreadfully professional, but isn't it pretty? All right, look how pretty these points are up here. All right, and in the early of the late, how lovely. And look how really icky's a good word here, these points are. The material isn't right, the workmanship. You find in the late archaic, one of the things that happens is that the workmanship on the tools begins to get sloppy. Now, up until now, the workmanship has been very pretty, and it's now getting very sloppy. Is it that they don't have enough time with everything else they're doing to make the proper tools? Or is it they don't need to? Pretty tools please the animal gods, you get your game. If you've got lots of game, why do you have to worry about it? That's going to change. Because one of the things that happens, maybe before I should do that, why don't we play with something else? Tools, you hear me talk about them all the time. Here we have the stone tools. These are made out of flakes, I think. All right. The points that you see are what we call bifaces. They're flaked on both sides. When I mention a flake, it's only flaked on one side. So the dull, unflaked side is the one that's down, and the pretty side is up in the boxes. But we have perforators and saws and drills. Well, perforators and drills go in the same category. We have knives, scrapers. We have all kinds of things that they make out of the tools. We have a formal industry, which would be the bifaces that you've seen, and we have the informal, which are just flakes. And that would be what we've got in this box. These are flakes that are made, and there are all kinds of tools. These are stored and left behind. The little ones are taken whenever they move. The other thing they're doing now that's different, and this is why we see more of these tools at the site, is they used to move the entire community to the next site. They're not doing that anymore. What they're doing now is the hunters go out to the hunting site. They may stay a few days. They get whatever they're going to get and they bring it back. So now everything is sort of radiating out from the site. One of the things you've got at Richardson that makes it important is it has quartz in the bedrock. It's really yucky quartz, but it makes good informal flake tools. There is, by the way, all through Ridgefield, which is one of the reasons I think we're so heavily populated, all through Ridgefield in bedrock, we have quartz varying from this really yucky stuff at Richardson to absolutely beautiful quartz. And they go there, and this is one of their resources, a resource to build tools. The other thing we have during the late Archaic is a huge fluorescence. Here again, these are tools, all kinds of them, and you'll notice like this black one, they're ground tools, and there's a couple of little ground tools, and a fishing wave ground tool. One of the things that you find during the late Archaic, they start making ground tools. You can make a projectile point, if you know what you're doing, in a half hour. It takes longer to make the spear than it does the point. A ground tool takes forever. So again, they have the time, and they use the time to make the ground tools. This may be another reason why the flake tools begin to look, yeah. And you'll notice in the box that there's probably rock in there that you don't find in Ridgefield. It could come in on Glacial Till. This is where we get the quartzite that we make tools out of here. In fact, over at Lake Kitchewan, I found one property that I worked on that literally covered with quartzite cobbles. It really looked as if they had stored them there. There were so many. You don't find that many at Richardson. Onondaga and Coxsackie chert is from Coxsackie and Onondaga. It is not local, it has got brought to us by trade. And they've got a trade going. Now, their trade is interesting because at Lake Kitchewan, we have a property over there that about 44% of the material used for the tools was Onondaga chert, Onondaga and Coxsackie chert. If we find 4% tools that are chert in Ridgefield, it's like 10, it is rain chert. I mean, this is amazing. They have 44%. And I was able to trace at one point the trade routes. We're getting it from there here. They're trading the people over at Lake Kitchewan and bringing it in. That was my original research. I was very proud of myself, by the way, on that thesis. That was, well, the reason why is that oftentimes a master's student in my area will do research using someone else's stuff, which is fine. You learn a lot. But I had started digging, and I thought this one up all by myself. And it's called, Do You See Me Gloat? When we go to the transitional archaic, it's a very short period of time, it's only about 700 years, but we see something happen on the site. The populations drop. There's something not right, okay? Now we get new technology. It's during the transitional period that you get soapstone bowls. They're not very pretty. They're also not used for cooking. They're strictly used for storage. It's another sign, by the way, that our people are living in a territory. This is a piece of a soapstone bowl. Picture toting. You have seen these. I'm not handing them to you. No, it just dawned on me I hadn't been. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Can you imagine toting something that is made out of that material? They're not very pretty. They're certainly innovative, and they're used for storage. So we have, but something's not right. And you can tell it. And one of the things that's really sort of cool is when you look at the artifacts, you go, wow. They're beautiful again. The material is great. They are beautifully flaked. And the other thing you notice in this box, they're definitely trading. This particular point right here is a point that is native to Pennsylvania, as is the material. That is trade. The points are gorgeous. Something is going on, and we don't know what. And before I get there, I should probably have done this one a little bit sooner. When I talk about a hafted, which I haven't talked about with you all, this is what I mean by a hafted tool. This is not an artifact. Well, it is an artifact. It is not one of our artifacts from Richardson. This is handmade by an expert. This shows you how they hafted to the shaft. Alrighty, but something happens. And that something is called early woodland. And in the early woodland, the temperatures plummet. They get so low that the nut-bearing trees die out. Now, when those trees are dying out, you better believe the other vegetation is dying out. No food for the animals are going to die out. We know that our population of natives in the Northeast die out. There are communities like the Maritime Archaic that totally disappear. You find very, very few sites in the early woodland because they simply don't exist. You find burial sites, but that gets to be just about it. Our people are facing destruction. Now, one of the things, by the way, that keeps our guys going is the trade. Each area has its own thing, so you trade what you've got to somebody else, you're going to get it. Trade is their social security system, in a sense. Another one is their trading, is their supporting each other and their generosity among their own people. This is one of the things that when the Europeans arrived, they noticed how the native people shared among themselves. So they do survive. And let me tell you, they survive at Richardson. I'm going to pass a picture about, shows you how boats are made, dugouts to be polite. We found at Richardson, what we're also finding at Richardson, which I really should follow my notes more closely, in the late Archaic, we found 4 hearths with carbon dates. We found, other than this also dates our site. But the fact that we had 4 hearths, we had these 4 dwellings, we have more people than any other time. Well, in the early woodland, we don't know it's the early woodland yet, because we're just digging, we find charcoal, yay high, off, all right? And it's shaped a point going out like this. Actually, it looks like a little volcano. I have not a clue what's going on there. Absolutely no clue at all. Because when you have a hearth, it has a narrow bottom and does this. It's a little wider at the top. Sort of bowl shaped, not mountain shaped. Well, the historian from over in Lewisboro dug with me for quite a while. And she asked me one day, and I swear she must have known, was thinking what came up, how they made dugout canoes. Now when I'm talking, I'm facing the site where this stuff is. She's digging that area. And I go, and I explain, you set a fire, the tree falls down, after you burn it down, you then put it up, and you build a fire along the top. And then when the fire goes out, you scrape it out with woodworking tools, which we found, by the way, less than a meter away. I can be so dumb sometimes. Now, if I did not talk with my hands, if I sat on my hands, I couldn't talk. And I'm doing this as I'm showing her how these things do. And then I suddenly made the realization. If they were doing that, it would fall this way. We not only have population with diagnostic artifacts at Richardson and diagnostic workplaces and the whole bit, right? We have them building a boat. They live on a lake. It's a duh. However, a population, we have people at Richardson. We're not one of the places they disappear. They probably survived because of the same situation you have. It's warmer by the water than it is in other places. And here are woodwick, a gouge and an adze. These are found, I dropped something? No, I didn't. Oh, okay. Alrighty. Let me get my toys. Well, by the time you get to the middle woodland, things have warmed up substantially. The population has begun to increase, and things are really getting great. You also get, oh, I forgot to tell you, in the early woodland, they begin to make pots, clay pots. Really, they're rough-tempered, they're thick, they're not all that pretty. They're used for storage. You can't use them for cooking, because if you fire them, they're going to break, because they're just too thick and roughly tempered. When you get to the middle woodland, the pots begin to slim down, less thick. They're tempering them differently. And at the late early woodland, we think they really begin to use them on the fire. Anyone want to know how they made stew before they had pots? Would you like to know? Okay. Well, the first thing you did is you got the brave in the house, your warrior, to go out and get you a deer skin, and then you made a bag out of it. And you took the bag and you hung it not over the fire, it'll burn right up. You hang it near the fire, you put your ingredients in, and you now take rocks from the fire and you put them in the bag and you boil your water. And you keep it going until your stew is cooked. How often would you serve your family stew if you had to do that? You can also, by the way, make glue out of deer hooves, doing the same thing. Pots are going to be a great thing to have in our day. And this is how they're cooking. Now, another big goodie happens in the middle woodland. We have arrowheads. I've already called this poor gentleman to task because he called a bunch of projectile points arrowheads. You do not have my kids used to do it just to make me mad, by the way. You do not have arrowheads until you get to the middle woodland. That is when the bow and arrow finally gets up here. This little baby right here is a Lavana. It is the first arrowhead that shows up at Richardson Park. Wait, maybe I should say the first whole arrowhead we found at Richardson Park. They've been there before. All right? This is your arrowhead. The other thing is, look at this artifact here. This is one of your chert from a distance. These are arrowheads for the middle and late woodland period. Arrowheads, I did it. There are artifacts in there, most of which are, the ones on the right are the arrowheads. So now we have, now what they've done now, it's interesting because you can watch the progression of weapons or hunting tools, if you want to look at them that way. They start out with those big pin points. That's because they're using a thrusting spear. Then they go to the lighter, smaller points on the end of their spear because they're now throwing spears. The game is smaller, so you don't have to get closer to thrust. You can throw them. And another reason the points become smaller. And then you get the atlatl, or the spear thrower, which, by the way, increases the force. And by the time you start getting the spear thrower, you no longer need a whole group to go hunting. you can narrow it down to just a few. And the bow and arrow increases their productivity enormously. They've really got, by this time, a fairly good life going. In the late woodland, we find pots become really pretty, and they become used for cooking over the fire. Our population is approaching, it's getting toward the late archaic. You also find that what we've got in the late woodland, in the Northeast in general, and around here you can see it also, you find more totally permanent communities. They're not really moving from place to place at all. And one of the reasons for this permanency would be, as you see, agriculture. It came in, you could see it in the Susquehanna Valley much earlier, around 10,000 or so, 1,000 or so. You don't really get it here until about 1400 AD, BP. I should have the list in front of me. It's AD, I was right the first time. All right. Around here, you don't get it. There's evidence, by the way, down in Norwalk, by the Sound. There's a site with agriculture. In Ridgefield, you don't have it. Why? We've got food all over the place. We have all this water with the fish and everything else. We have the deer meadows. Why try a new food thingy that you're not sure about when you've got the food you need? Life is really cool. We are making wonderful tools. These are bifacial tools. They're gorgeous. We're settled. We've got a great life, and in fact, they're on track to become what we had at this time out in the Midwest and in the Southwest, where we begin to get more complex chiefdoms, trade, everything. But we don't get it here. We get something else here. We get what is called contact. What is contact? In the 1500s, Verrazano arrives, and before that, we get the fishermen from the Viking, Nova Scotia, that area, that come in to fish here, and they take natives back with them. You get Verrazano, who maps the coastline. He also came in contact with the natives. The Spanish, of course, have conquered South America and Mesoamerica and are moving into Florida. The Lost Colony in Roanoke, Virginia, has been founded and lost in the 1500s. By the 1600s, you find that the Dutch have arrived. They cover all of the Manhattan area from the Hudson, that's not Manhattan, from the Hudson to the Norwalk River and up the rivers. The English have also arrived here and in Virginia. They've totally taken it. And in 1634, there's a smallpox epidemic in the Connecticut River Valley. There's technology when they move in. Stuff our guys have never seen. And it's awesome. But you know, you've got bigger numbers. You've got more people than they do. You can take care of it. Except they bring diseases. The smallpox, 1634. Our people are decimated. There are experts that say between 75 and 95% of the population dies. And it isn't just the people that's dying. You know, the gal who used to lead the gathering, who knew where those really great lily roots were, bulbs were, that made her venison stew so great, she died before she told her daughter-in-law where her secret spot was. The storyteller. The storyteller who passed down the history and the story of our people, he dies. And the guys he's training hadn't learned all the stuff he needed to know. The headhunter is dead. The midwife who delivered the babies is dead. The babies. So many children. It isn't the population that dies, it's the culture that dies. And our people never get to the heights they could have gotten because they've been invaded. And here we are. We have at Richardson things from the invasion, and you will find there's a little stone that is a gunflint. We have another little stone here, it's a little stone drill. So we have contact at Richardson, which stands to reason. The property was sold to our settlers by Takora in 1715. It was first used for timbering. And Richardson, well, before we get to Anne, now I'm going to pass a picture. This couldn't have been any better if someone had gone in there and planted it for us to find. One of the finds at the site, at exactly 10 centimeters, exactly where it should have occurred, is that native drill in that box and one of the buckles from the contact period. Couldn't say any better how well they intermixed. So the settlers are here. We still have natives in the area. They remain in the area. In fact, we've still got them running around 1743-ish when they're running, the proprietors are running back and forth, making deals, land deals with them. They're still here. Modern time, Anne Richardson buys the property in 913. She builds the house around 1915. Plants those trees that messed up my site in around 1934, and she died, of course, in 65. The land for Richardson was bought from the Richardson estate. Richardson Park, I think, across the town, a little in excess of 107,000, and that's 10,000 years. And questions if you have them.
When the glaciers receded, you mentioned that what was left behind was stones and rocks and sand, but no soil. Where did the soil come from?
Have you ever swept the kitchen floor? Because you haven't, because you wouldn't know if you swept the kitchen floor. All right.
Dust.
Other than being a smart aleck, it's brought in the beginning by animals, dirty little creatures. How does soil form? I should ask somebody who could tell me.
Dead leaves.
Yeah, it's just things that we're able to grow and are organic. Die off and...
But it takes time.
Right.
And also the other thing you've got, especially around here, wherever you have a river that freezes over and then defrost and the rushing water in the spring, you're going to find soil deposited. And by the way, soil does not stay where you put it. I have found at Richardson where soil washed down the hill and was stopped by a stone, it was about this wide, about that high when we stopped digging. It was about this much under the ground that ran almost the length of the site. And the soil was higher on that side, on this side, the upside of that little wall, than it was on the other side. We had more soil before we got to the sand and clay. But it's made over the centuries. And as it's made, of course, it begins to layer. And depending what plants are involved, and what is involved in the making of that soil as to its texture and content and color. Obviously, your very top soils are going to be around here a darker brown than the soil underneath it. If I were giving, complete with slides and all that bit, I'd have the picture up there, a stratigraphy. But that's how, and that is, by the way, a very good question. I wasn't trying to be really smart aleck but it seems to me in my kitchen, every time I sweep it, it appears as soon as he comes in the back door without wiping his feet. Any other questions?
Yeah. Did you work at any other sites in Ridgefield besides Richardson?
I haven't, but other people have. Ernie did Great Pond. I'm drawing a total blank. I played around at a lot of other, I played around, I really dug. Most of my information, when we do in here, is from people who bring me collections, and then I go look at the territory. I've done test pits in several places, but I've not done what I did at Richardson here. I did it over at Lake Kitchewan. I came up with 3 different places at Lake Kitchewan that were sites. But around here, I've done mostly either walking the ground. Oh, poor Walter gets so many stories told on him, and it's not nice. My husband loves hiking. I think hiking is something you do because you have to.
Yeah.
And if you're an archaeologist, you have to. And I walked a lot of land, town land over here and over New York State. And they have paths. And Walter, one time we're walking, he says, you're looking at where you're not going to find any artifacts there. The words were not out of his mouth 2 seconds. And I bent over and I picked up, in this case, a real arrowhead. And I said, no. Because it rains, the soil washes away. I've done a lot of ground searches in various and sundry places. But in Ridgefield, the only dig that I really played with. Now, of course, Ernie did the one at Great Pond. And it seems to me there's another one, and I'm drawing a total blank. I'll blame it on age and not poor memory. Anything else?
You mentioned, I think it was in the early archaic period, there was all of a sudden a very rapid increase in population. Was that because of...
Not early archaic, late.
Was it middle or late archaic? Okay, correct.
Late.
Was that because of a decline in infant mortality or for some other reason?
Food. Straight out and out, simple. The weathers are optimally warm, and food. In the paleo, you've got almost no food at all. It's amazing anyone survived wandering the land. The early archaic, you get more food because it's warmer and the vegetation has increased, therefore the animals increased. In the late archaic, your temperatures are, as I said, as warm as today or maybe warmer. You've got food all over the place. This is why you get the increase. And of course there's going to be less infant mortality because you've got more food to keep them alive. Okay?
Yes, I mean, I'm also wondering if the birth rate increased for some.
Well, of course it has to
that birth rate
increase.
increased because the women and the men, especially the women, were healthier. They had more food to eat, so they became pregnant more often,
Well,
and
of
they
course,
carried to.
if you get an increase in population, of course you get an increase in babies. That sort of figures. That's how it happens. At least that's what Mommy said.
Well,
I'm teasing you. I shouldn't. I'm sorry. But no, what you're talking about, and this is what happened, is that there's so much food that the population increased too rapidly. Too many babies, not enough food. Now that they knew how to get, it was there, but they didn't know how to harvest it. Okay? Have we got you satisfied there?
I'm just wondering also if if there's more food available, especially to women, then are they more likely to conceive children? Do they become more fertile?
Of course. And the babies, which would have died off at birth because there wasn't enough food for every, and the women weren't that healthy, stopped dying. You have less infant mortality. You have more babies. Again, this is your increase in your population. And the situation was really great. And everyone was more healthy, which is probably why things got done the way they did. There was more hunting and gathering, there was more fishing, there was more everything. You had a,
Well, you've talked about the population's increasing and decreasing, and I was wondering if you have an estimate of how large the population was.
not really, that, I think somebody who knew what they were talking about would be better to answer that question. But what I can tell you
We were talking
is
hundreds
the
probably, not thousands.
huge increase in population in Ridgefield. There are, without even worrying about 29 different sites in Ridgefield that I can think of offhand, or if you gave me a map I could point to. And of those, almost every one of them had a late archaic component. The people are all over the place. The other thing you're going to find is at Lake Mamanasco. You've got them all around the lake. And the sites that I've come across around there all had a late archaic component. You find late archaic everywhere. It isn't like finding an early archaic point, which is one place on 116. They have an early archaic point. We've got them in 2 places in Ridgefield. We would be talking in thousands, but a couple of thousand, not. I just know there were oodles. Okay, I saw a hand over here. The sun is in my
That's
face.
okay. I had 2 questions.
Well, can you make it a little louder?
When did the early woodland period start? And are these sites that are around Ridgefield and Kitchewan, are they
Well, wait, let's start
protected?
with the early woodland thing, then we'll get to the second one.
Okay.
I think the sheet says 3,700 to 3,000.
I don't know what it is you're
3,000.
talking
Starting
about.
at 3,000.
Okay. Whatever the little sheet says.
I only have 2 sheets. Oh, I'm missing a sheet, no wonder. All my notes are probably.
I'm missing the sheet too. I'm missing that sheet.
I hate to say this, but you do know that sounds like something I would do. You do know that.
Okay. Well, are these sites that you found protected? Or are they open to the public, or are they cordoned
Thank you.
off, or
Thank you
are they
very much.
protected from the general public?
All the land, all the sites on town land are protected.
What does that mean?
You ain't gonna dig no holes unless you've got permission. You don't build on, in other words, if they are, they better, or I'm going to, picket Rudy when I go in to do rides for Ridgefield. It means basically that, okay, lands that would be protected, Pierpont is protected, it's state land. It, by the way, is also a site. You don't dig on Pierpont unless you get permission. All right? But our parkland in general, our wetlands and so on, are protected from people going in and building on them and so on. So if the sites are there, they are protected. Now, if they're on private land, they're not. And I'm of 2 feelings about that. I want to preserve the Native American stuff. I mean, not only, obviously I've got this thing about them, or I wouldn't be a prehistoric archaeologist, but you can watch a culture develop. I'm being too romantic. You don't want the culture to be destroyed. You want to have it there. It's part of our innate history. It's a part of us, even though we weren't there then. It's a part of our town. It's of course a part of their own culture. All right? And they have as much right to that culture as I have to brag about my forefathers arrived in Jamestown in 1619. Are you with me? It needs to be saved. All right. On private land, you buy your land, it's your land. You have the right to do with it, even though you're sitting there with, in the piece of land I'm thinking of, 8,000 years that I can prove that they were on that land. From the time the Titicaca River went into closer to its present channel, after it had laid down that land. That would have been around the late Archaic. But that landowner has the right to that land. So I have difficulty when I advise people whether or not to register your land with the state. Now, once you register it with the state, if I'm not mistaken, there is a certain amount of protection then, right? Yeah. Now, so I explained and I would say not one person that I have found a site on their land has not registered it with the state.
Why?
Because they feel that it's important that stuff not get lost.
Oh, okay. I thought they did. I thought you said they didn't. I'm
Mhm.
sorry.
So, do we have anything else?
When were you doing most of your research on Richardson Park? What years?
I started, that's very funny, I started 2 years after I recovered from surgery, 2005.
Oh, that recently, okay. What about like the new high school? Was there any?
Oh, that was the site I couldn't remember. Not the new high school, the middle school. As
The
a
new middle
site.
school or the old middle school? Or
The
East
new
Ridge?
middle school has a site underneath it, Scotts Ridge.
Oh,
And
really?
another one is where Parks and Rec is another site in Ridgefield. It's been, we have here I turned over a box of artifacts from the Scott Ridge site. The Scott Ridge site is an interesting site. All right. Richardson is the dwelling site. Okay, guys? The site at Scott Ridge is one of the work sites. It's a very short distance. They're going over to Scott Ridge to do something. And it's swampland. Look how close it is to the Titicaca River. It's swampland. And there's a whole new little tool category that I've not seen written up that I find there, and I have found at other swamp sites in town. And do you know what the scythe that you cut down things within a field looks like? All right, picture that shape. All right, with a little tiny handle. These things have that shape, and the point has been used to go in and do this, and then below the point has been used to cut.
What? What did they
And
cut?
I've got to do some experimentation, and I simply haven't gotten to it. They're harvesting something that they poke, twist, and cut. Reeds for baskets? I'm asking down there. Does that sound reasonable?
Would there be rice?
Pardon?
Could that be rice harvesting?
I'm still not.
Rice?
Rice?
I don't know if it's swampland.
Yeah. Not rice though, they don't have rice yet.
Okay.
But, well, no, see, I figured what you were figuring, the food, when they're harvesting the food. But this is a lot of wear and a lot of these tools. I have a site down on the Wilton Ridgefield border where we don't have a whole lot of, I have a date and so on. It's definitely a work site. It's in a swamp. And to put it very unprofessionally, I have a handful of these things. And we're not dealing with a dwelling site here. It is definitely a work site. It's one of those things I gathered from the guy who has that site. The tools, rocks that look like the ones that, the artifacts. And we're going to gather our own reeds, and we're going to cut them and see if we can get the same use where as a starter. And then, of course, I've got to start searching the literature, which I've only done. But I found that, my first time I found them, and I went, what are these? Was at Scotts Ridge. But it is a work site.
What about it when the new high school was built? Was there anything,
The new high school?
Extensively changed that?
When the
piece
new
of
high
it.
school was built, no one bothered to do, that kind of thing was not done.
Yeah.
It was, the search for the land to do, when you build a town and take a look at the land, that is relatively modern. In fact, you'll find for the Parks and Rec that I've read all the drainage reports and all that bit for them, and also George Walwer, by the way, was the first person to give my work written official notice. He quoted me in his, it was so cool. I hadn't even finished my degree yet. And someone patted me on the back. But if you build on town or state property, you have to get an archaeologist come in and check it. And that's how they found both the rec center and the school.
Yeah.
Now, in the case of the pond, Great Pond, that was found by a student, Ernie Wiggins' class, which, by the way, if any of you ever want to play in this field, take his class in Norwalk. That's how I started. I learned more about excavating there than I did short of my internship in Williamsburg anywhere else. One of his students, you have to find, by the way, a site. You're, all by yourself, something that hasn't been worked with. And one of his students found artifacts there, and the class excavated it. My site, by the way, I remember driving my child up West Mountain Road and looking at a site, at a rock shelter, and going, and these are the days you could use this word. If I were an Indian, I'd camp overnight there. And I go, oh, mother, teenage boys.
Yeah.
Well, the following year, I went and knocked on her door, explained who I was and what I wanted to do. And she said, isn't that fun? Go to it. And when I found the diagnostic point, my first diagnostic point, I discovered I could jump up and down on my hands and knees. Not only that, when I take it to the lady, the artifact is on your land. It's yours. And I told her what I found, and I told her that it was hers as soon as I got it documented. And she said, I have no use for it. Why don't you keep it? Yes! It is now, however, here. I no longer have it. Are you?
Final questions?
Yeah.
We're going to wrap up for today.
Yes. Do we know where the so-called Indian burial grounds are in Ridgefield? Are we allowed to go visit
To
them?
begin with, they've never been found.
There's not even one?
Not even one.
Really, not anymore.
I have found human parts over at Lake Kitchewan. I never found a burial. I found a finger
Oh, goodness.
bone over there.
There is an Indian burial ground, which is even on a Rand McNally map off of Route 58, just south of Reading in Easton. And it says on the map, Indian burial grounds. And I went there, and they have piles of stone, several piles of stone, which is supposedly, I guess, is the Indian burial ground. And I was very curious about it, but I didn't go look to see if I could find any bone fragments.
Oh, you didn't bring a shovel?
Or skull.
I've not checked that out. I've got to admit, I tend to be
know you
very,
Where's Kitchewan? Kitchewan, I forgot.
it's a quarter of a mile from the southwestern point of the first deed. I'm sorry.
Is it Norwalk?
It's over in,
Or
Lewis-
South
Salem.
South
Oh,
Salem.
South Salem. I was being silly. Sorry about that. But that's very funny because in that first deed with Katona,
Yeah.
it proclaims that all the land is in Connecticut, in the colony of Connecticut.
Not so.
There's this little corner. And it even tells you how far away it is from that lake. And that's not in the colony.
Could you tell us a little bit about that balanced rock area?
The one I couldn't remember the name.
Yeah.
North Salem?
What do I think it is? I don't know. I can tell you definitely what it is not put there by. The Celts did not come over here and do it. Do you know the main reason I know that? Is that would be the time period where we had the largest fluorescence of native population.
Mm-hmm.
What happened when those guys from Europe came over with their diseases? It killed the population. I really do not have a professional opinion. I can see definitely where it could have been. I think it's a boundary marker to one of Tacora's territories. No proof that's, actually, I probably never even should have told you that. All right? I do think it's, a boundary marker. In other words, I'm telling you, I do believe the original finding of the balance of those was Native American. Do I know for certain? Can I prove it? No. And no one else can prove. My favorite is aliens did it, but
Well, the rocks that it's balanced on, they must be much bigger in the earth.
but you see, I've looked at that thing. Actually, it's included in my thesis, not how it got there. I
Yes.
wasn't that dumb to do that. But I have done a lot of exploration in that area. And I could conceivably see we're digging under the rock to put something. What a great place to hide something. All right? Again, we're just talking. And finding the rocks. So you take out all the rocks you want. You actually. By the way, when I see you again, remind me to tell you about the Brat's new $20,000 raise.
Oh.
$20,000 raise.
Okay, we are going to end the program for today. I want to thank Lynn Marie for joining us. Thank you so much for telling us about Native American life in Ridgefield and for showing us the stone tools that you excavated at Richardson Park. I'd like to remind everyone that Lynn Marie is a professional, trained, and has a degree. Every artifact that you saw is cataloged, has an ID number on it, and she published a site report, a really thick report of her research. So it's really important that these sites in Ridgefield are identified, studied by professionals, and preserved so that we'll be able to share this important history with future generations. I just want to briefly mention our next History Club meeting is Tuesday, December 17th at 10 o'clock. Please come back here. We're going to be talking about holiday meals. Bring your favorite recipes that have been handed down through your families. Betsy has historic Ridgefield cookbooks and menus that we're going to pull out. So we're going to be talking about what people have eaten during the holidays throughout time. So please come back and join us for that. Thank you.
Thank you.